6. Norik did not leave his cabin again until time came to retrieve his morning meal. No one spoke to him, especially Captain Costco, who had not forgiven his passenger for leaving the mess near the rail. Norik actually appreciated the lack of conversation, wanting nothing to slow his return to the safety of his room. He had slept fitfully during the night, not only haunted by dreams of Bartek's glory, but now also dread images of Fatsin's vengeful spirit coming to claim him. Not until the Hawksfire finally set sail did the veteran fighter calm at all. Out on the sea, troubled spirits could certainly not pursue him. In fact, as the ship pushed out onto the stormy waters, it finally began to sound reasonable to Norik that he had imagined the dreadful vision. That what he had taken for Fatsin had either been but another Viserai, for certainly the port lay near enough to their eastern lands, or the complete figment of his own troubled mind. The latter seemed more and more likely. After all, Norik had been both physically and mentally torn apart by the demands of the cursed armor. The memories of not only the tomb, but the slaughter at the end remained with him. In addition, the warlord's suit had pushed his endurance to the limits and beyond, forcing the soldier to traverse a rough landscape without hardly any rest, and at a pace that would have killed many men, if not for the fact that only part of the effort had been his own. Norik suspected that he would definitely have died along the way. The waves grew choppier as the Hawksfire entered deep waters. With each groan of the hull, Norik became more and more convinced that at some point the sea would crush the worn ship like tinder. Yet somehow the Hawksfire continued on, riding one wave to the next. In addition, for all their motley appearance, Captain Costco and his crew provide quite adept at managing the vessel. They scurried up the ropes, raced across the decks, ever keeping their ship ready to meet the elements. What they could not entirely keep at bay, though, was the storm. It struck but few hours out, the sky blackening and lightning flashing all about. The winds picked up, bending the masts and trying to rip the sails. Norik, who had finally stepped out, quickly gripped the rail as the sea tossed the Hawksfire to the side. "Starboard!" called Costco from the deck. "Starboard!" The man at the wheel worked to obey, but wind and water battled against him. A second crew member came to his aid, the pair managing to fulfill the captain's orders after great effort. Rain at last fell, a torrent that forced Norik back into the cabin. Not only did he know nothing about sailing, but clad in armor, he risked his life every time he neared the rail. It would take only one strong wave to toss him over the side. A soiled lantern swinging violently from the ceiling tried desperately to keep the cabin illuminated. Norik planted himself on the inside corner of the bunk and tried to think. He had not yet completely given up hope of escaping the cursed armor, but so far had no ideas what to do. It would require a powerful sorcery, and he knew one with such abilities. If he could only have asked Fatsin. The memory of what he had thought he had seen on the deck earlier full blown, sending renewed chills through Norik. Best to forget about Fatsin. And Satan too. They were dead. Night came, and still the storm did not abate. Norik forced himself down the mess, where he noticed for the first time some of the crew eyeing him with more than disinterest and disdain. Now a few gazes seemed almost hostile, and yet frightened. Norik had no doubt that it had to do with the armor. Who was he? They must be wondering. The armor spoke of power, of command. Why did such as one as he travel on a miserable vessel such as the Hawksfire? Again, he took his meal to the cabin, preferring the solitary atmosphere. This time he found the food slightly more palatable, and perhaps the previous meals, and burned away his tongue. But Nork devoured it, fell back, and tried to go back to sleep. He did not look forward to the sleep. Both the dreams of Bartok and the nightmares surrounding the tomb, not at all enticements. However, exhaustion quickly set in, and, as a veteran campaigner, Nork Vizerin knew better than to try to fight it. Even the violent rocking of the Hawk's fire could not keep his eyes from closing. "It would be nice to rest," came a crackling, yet still familiar voice. "But after all, they say, no rest for the wicked, eh?" Nork bolted to his feet, eyes wide. Barely any light shone from the lantern, but even with what little he had, the soldier could see that no one else stood in the room. Damn! Another nightmare. Staring at the lantern, Nork realized that he must have fallen asleep without realizing it. The voice had been in his head, nowhere else. The voice of a comrade now lost. Satan's voice. Thunder crashed. The Hawk's fire shivered. Nork gripped the side of the cot, then started to ease himself back onto it. "You should have listened to Fotzen, Nork. Now it may be too late." He froze where he was, gaze shifting to the door. "Come to us, friend. Come to Fotzen and me." Nork straightened. "Satan?" No reply, but some of the planks just outside the cabin creaked as if someone walked upon them and then paused before his door. "Is someone out there?" The Hawk's fire dipped, nearly sending him tumbling. Nork flattened himself against a wall, eyes never leaving the doorway. He had imagined Trist's crackling labor voice. The days since the horror of the tomb had tested the veteran's nerve more than any battle in which he had fought. Yet still something within urged Nork toward the door. Most likely when he opened it, there would be nothing. Satan and the Viserai could not be out there, awaiting the friend who had so terribly murdered them. Such things did not happen, save in tales spoken in whispers around late-night campfires. But such things as the dreadful armor Nork wore did not happen outside of those tales either. Again the planks creaked. Nork gritted his teeth, reached toward the latch. The gauntleted hand suddenly twitched and began to glow a sinister red. Nork drew the glove back, watching in wonder as the glow now faded. He reached forward once more, but this time nothing happened. Steeling himself, Nork undid the latch, then swung open the door. Rain and wind battered him, but no fearsome shade stood outside the cabin. Bony out fingers stretched in condemnation. Seizing his cloak, Nork hurried outside, his gaze immediately shifting first to the left, then to the right. Toward the bow, he saw the dim shapes of men struggling to keep the sails in order, but of the supposed phantoms, he found no trace. A hard trampling of feet made him look in the direction of the stern again, where he saw one of Costco's men running toward the bow. The men would have passed Nork without a glance, but the soldier seized him, ignoring the sailor's fear glare. He shouted, "Did you see anyone? Did you see anyone before you standing by my cabin?" The sailor spat something in another tongue, then pulled away from Nork as if just touched by a leper. Nork watched the man run off, then shifted his own attention to the rail. A notion filled his head that found entirely ludicrous, but still made him risk fate by actually stepping to the edge and peering over the side. Waves shattered unceasingly against the time-worn hull of the Hawk's fire, doing their best, it seemed, to pound through the wood and send the vessel to its occupants to the watery tombs. The sea beyond churned wildly, sometimes rising so high that Nork had trouble seeing the heavens. But of its supposed visitor he saw no sign. No vengeful ghoul clung to the side of the hole. The unforgiving shades of Satan, Trist, and Fotzen had not, after all, been standing outside his cabin door. He had imagined them, just as he first believed. "Ooh! What you do out? Inside! Inside!" The hobbling form of Captain Casca closed in on Nork from the bow. Casca seemed completely outraged that his sole passenger had dared the elements. Nork doubted it had to do with the concern of the veteran's well-being. As with the rest of the crew, a hint of fright tinged Casca's angry words. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Wrong! Wrong?" the cadaverous mariner barked back. "Nothing wrong! Back to cabin! Storm outside! You fool!" Half tempted to respond yes to Costco's question, Nork did not bother to argue with the man. With the crippler mariner watching, he returned to the cabin, closing the door on Costco's scowling visage. After a moment, Nork heard him stump away. The thought of trying to fall asleep again did not at all appeal to Nork, but nonetheless tried. At first, questions raced through his thoughts, all but one of which the veteran could answer. That lone question concerned the crimson gauntlet, and why it had begun to glow just prior to his going outside to search. If no danger had lurked beyond the door, what reason would the armor have for such a protective measure? True, it had not seized control of him, but still, its actions had appeared to have some purpose. Nork fell asleep, still pondering the suit's reaction. He did not stir again until a crack of thunder that shook the cabin nearly caused him to tumble out of the makeshift bunk. Disoriented, the soldier tried and failed to calculate just how long he had been asleep. The storm still blew strong, which to Nork meant that it could not have been more than a few scant hours. Rarely had a storm that he had suffered through lasted more than a day, although he supposed that on the high sea it could be different. Arms and legs stiff, Nork stretched and tried to go back to his slumber. A long, crackling sound far different from thunder again brought him to his feet. He recognized that sound, even if it had not heard it often. It had been the sound of wood breaking, and on a ship in the midst of a wild storm that could spell doom for everyone. Nork burst out of the cabin, heading toward the bow. Shouts informed him that the crew already struggled to deal with whatever danger threatened, but he knew how difficult their task would be if what he suspected had truly occurred. Bad enough for the ship to suffer damage, but to try to repair it during such chaos? A moment later, his worst fears had been realized. Just ahead, several sailors fought to keep one of the masts from entirely cracking in two. They pulled on ropes, trying to force the upper portion in place, while other men attempted to strengthen the ruined area with planks, nails, and more rope. Nork, however, could barely tell that theirs had become a struggle in futility. More and more the mast leaned dangerously, and when it went, others would surely soon follow. He wanted to do something, but none of the skills he had learned would have been of aid to the more experienced mariners. Nork stared at the gauntleted hands, the crimson color making them look so mighty, so full of strength. Yet, all the vaunted power of Bartuk's legacy would avail him nothing now. The thought faded as an unsettling blue aura formed without warning around each glove. Nork suddenly found himself rushing forward, the suit again in command of his actions. For once, though, the veteran fought little against it. Certain of its intentions, if not its methods, the armor desired to reach its distant destinations, and it could not if Nork sank to the bottom of the sea. For Nork's life alone, it needed to act. "Away! Away!" shouted Captain Costco, no doubt certain that his clumsy passenger would just make a terrible situation worse. Nork, though, barged past him, nearly bowling the crippling mariner over. The mast creaked ominously, a sure sign that only seconds remained before it toppled into the next. Nork took a deep breath, anxiously awaiting for the suit to act. "Kezar! Kezar Irakos!" Lightning punctured each word thrust from the soldier's mouth, but Nork paid it little mind. What he did notice, what all those around him also surely noticed, was that several shimmering green forms suddenly surrounded, even clung to the ruined mast. They had strong, sleek arms that ended in suckered fingers, but where there would have been legs, the monstrosities had bodies reminiscent of gigantic slugs. The creatures hissed and crawled their half-seen faces akin to some demented artist's idea of a bat made up like a clown, face painted and all. The sailors fled in panic, releasing their grip on the ropes and wood. Their mast started to fall. The shimmering horde pushed it back in place. While some held it there, others started to crawl around and around the ruined area. As they moved, they left trails of slime over the cracks. At first, Nork had no idea what they intended, but then he noticed that the slime almost immediately hardened, strengthening and stabilizing the mast. Over and over the creatures crawled, a madcap race with no finish line. Their brethren, no longer needed to support the mast, watched and waited, hissing in what seemed encouragement to the ones circling around the pole. Kezra! Kezra! Ranaka! The demons quickly crawled from the mast, grouping together. Nork pulled his gaze from the horrific band, looking over their completed handiwork. Despite the storm, the mast now swayed as if only in a gentle breeze. Not only had they repaired it, but they had reinforced it in such a manner that the odds were that it would better survive this voyage than the other two. It also satisfied the suit saved a negligent hand at the demons. A burst of light so bright that Nork had to shield his eyes covered the foul pack. The creatures hissing grew stronger, harsher, until with what seemed a sigh, the light faded out, leaving no trace of the slug-like beast. Not even a single trace of slime. Seemingly unimpressed, the storm battled on, tossing the hawksfire about. Yet despite the continued threat of it, the crew hesitated to return to their posts, only doing so when the captain finally shouted at them. The sailors who passed Nork gave the fighter a wide berth, their fear in him quite clear in their expressions. True, their lives had probably been spared because of the demons summoned, but to know one could call forth such horrific apparitions journeyed with them surely shook the men to the very core of their souls. Norik, however, did not care. So weary his legs threatened to collapse underneath him. Even though it had been the suit had cast the spell, he suddenly felt as if he had just rebuilt the entire mast single-handedly. Norik waited for the armor to guide him back to the cabin, but now that the danger had been dealt with, apparently it had left matters to him. The metal plate felt like 1,000 pounds as he turned and walked from the deck. Around him, Nork continued to feel the uneasy stares of the crew of the Hawk's Fire. No doubt they would soon forget that they owed their lives to his presence and begin to consider what it meant to have a master of demons aboard. Fear had a way of turning to violence. Yet, despite that knowledge, Norik sought only his bed. He very desperately needed sleep. Even the storm would not be able to keep him awake now. Come the morrow, he would do what he could to explain what had happened. Norik only hoped that, in the meantime, none of the crew would attempt anything foolish and fatal. Darkness. Warm, enveloping darkness. Kara nestled in it, dwelled in it, found it so comforting that for the longest time she had no desire to leave it. Yet, there came a point when something An uneasy feeling, a sense of foreboding, made her turn, shift, and try to wake. She also heard a voice. Kara! Lass! Where are you? The voice had a familiarity to it, one that slowly drew her from oblivion. As she tried to awaken, Kara Night Shadow's own will aided in the task. This darkness, this nothingness, held her prisoner. The comfort it offered was a smothering one, an eternal sleep. Kara! It no longer even comforted her. Now it scratched, crushed, felt more akin to a casket than a soft bed. Kara! The necromancer's eyes flew open. She stood imprisoned in a tomb of wood, her limbs seemingly frozen. Somewhere a hound barked. The necromancer blinked, trying to focus better. A few cracks of dim light shone through it, just enough to enable her to better understand what had become of her. Wood tightly surrounded her on all sides. A hollow tree without major openings. Somehow, she had been placed here, sealed in here. To die? A sense of claustrophobia had nearly overwhelmed her. Kara struggled to move her arms, but could not. They had been pinned to her sides and wrapped by vegetation growing in the hollow tree. Worse, moss also covered her mouth, sealing her lips together. She tried to make a sound, but muffled by both the moss and the thick trunk, Kara knew that no one outside would hear her. More hounds barked, this time nearer. She fixed on a voice. Captain Geronin's voice, calling her name. Kara, lass! Lass, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Her legs also could not move, likely for the same reasons as her arms. Physically, Kara had been left completely helpless. A sense of claustrophobia grew. Although the necromancer had lived much of her short life in seclusion, she had always had freedom of movement, freedom of choice. Her ghoulish attackers had left her without either. Why they had not slain her outright, the desperate dark mage could not say. But if she did not soon escape, her demise would be just as certain, and in a far slower, grislier fashion. And that thought, accompanied by her growing feeling that the tree trunk closed in on her from all sides, pushed Kara as none of her teachers had ever. She wanted us to escape, to be free, to not suffer the slow tortures of starvation. Bound as she was, with even her mouth sealed, so sophisticated spell could save her, yet raw emotions so generally kept under control by the followers of Rathma now bubbled up, demanded to overflow. Kara stared at the wood before her, seeing it as her nemesis, her tomb. She would not die this way. Not through the dark magic of an undead sorcerer. Not die this way. The interior of the trunk grew hot, stiffening. Sweat dripped over the necromancer. The vegetation seemed to tighten around her limbs. Not die. Her silver eyes flashed brighter. The tree exploded. Fragments of wood flew in all directions, bombarding the nearly landscape. Somewhere, Kara heard men swear and dogs whine. She could do nothing for them, though, and in truth could do no more for herself. The necromancer fell forward, her arms and legs no longer hindered. The instinctive reaction to put her hands out to save herself kept Kara from striking the ground head first, but did not prevent the jolt when her body hit, causing her from momentarily blacking out. Vaguely, she heard voices that seemed to draw nearer. A beast sniffed the ground near her head, its cold nose briefly rubbing against her ear. She heard a command, and then a strong but gentle hands touch her shoulders. Kara! What in the name of sea witch happened to ya, lass? Charon, she managed to utter, the effort nearly doing her in again. Easy, lass. Here, you fool, take the dog leashes. I'll see to her. Aye, Captain. Carly barely noticed the journey back to Gay Cool, save for one moment, when the innkeeper, who carried her in his arms, swore at one of his companions for nearly letting the dogs trip him. She drifted into the out of her consciousness, and now recalling her short glimpse of the two undead. Something about them had greatly disturbed her, more than she would have imagined possible. Even in her present state, it went through Kara's mind that they had been invisible to her senses, that they had played her, not only the other way around. Necromancers manipulated the forces of life and death, not the other way around. Yet the Vajeri and his grinding companion had toyed with Kara as if she had been less than a first-year novice. How? More to the point, why did they walk the world at all? The answer had to deal with her earlier error in the tomb. Somehow, although her training had never covered such astounding occurrences, when she had left the phantasm alone, it had been able to seize full control of the body. Then it must have summoned the companion it had known in life, the pair vanishing by magic before she returned. A simple explanation, and yet not at all satisfactory. Kara missed something. She felt sure of it. Enchantress? The word echoed in her skull, drowning out her thoughts. She forced her eyes open, which Kara had not even realized until now had been closed, and stared up at the concerned visage of Captain Hanos Duronin. What? Easy there, lass. You've gone 2 days without food and water. Not enough to do you any real harm, but still, too much for your own good. 2 days? She had been trapped in the tree for 2 days? When you vanished that night, I started to search right away. But not until morning did I find this pouch near the side of the inn. He held up a small leather pouch in which Kara stored some of the herbs necessary for her calling. Necromancer spells required other ingredients besides blood, although most outsiders could never knew that. Odd, though, that she shouldn't lose that pouch. It would have almost required her captors to spend precious time to tear it off. So securely had the young spellcaster generally kept it fastened. Of course, that made even less sense, since the only reason that they would bother that might to actually leave the clue to her kidnapping? Hardly something either ghoul would have done. But then, they had left her alive. If buried in the heart of a dead tree. She felt so confused. Her irritation must have shown, for the innkeeper immediately sought to aid her. What is it? You need more water? More blankets? Her words sounded more akin to the croaking of a frog, or too much like her more vocal assailant. Kara gratefully accepted water, then tried again. I'm alright, Captain, and I thank you for your care. I will of course pay you. I don't like foul language like that in my establishment, my lady. There'll be no more talk of that. He truly was a curiosity to her. Captain Geronin, most folk, especially Westerners, would rather have left one of my kind to rot in that tree, much less put together a search party. Why do you do this? The huge man looked uncomfortable. Always watch over my guests, lass. Despite the aches throughout her body, she pushed herself up to a sitting position. Dronin had given her a room such as she could have not imagined get cool. Clean and comfortable, with no odor of fish either. Truly a marvel. Yet Kara did not let her pleasant surroundings deter her from her question. Why? Do it, Captain. Why? I had me a daughter once, he began with much reluctance. And before you think it, she looked not a bit like you save and also being pretty. Jordan cleared his throat. Her mother was higher born than me, but my naval success let me rise to where we could wed. Tronin was born to us, but her mother never lived much beyond carrying her. A daring tear emerged from the gruff man's eye. One, the innkeeper, quickly brushed out of existence. For the next debacle and more, I could not stand my life because it tore me away from the one who left to me. Finally, I resigned my commission when she was just beginning to blossom into a fair maiden, and took her across the sea to a place I remember being so beautiful. Bless her, Terena never complained, even seemed to thrive here. Gay cool? Don't sound so surprised, lass. Was a much nicer, cleaner place a decade ago. Something's foul touched it since, just as it's touched every other place I hear of these days. Kara carefully kept her expression neutral. As one of the faithful of Rathma, she knew well that dark powers had begun to spread over the world. The ransacking of Bartek's tomb only exemplified that fact. The necromancer feared that soon the world would soon slip out of the delicate balance it needed to maintain, that the tide would shift toward the lords of hell, that demons already walked the world again. Captain Geronin had been taking the whole while she considered all of this, and so Kara had missed his few past words. However, something at the end caught her attention. So much so that she had to blurt, "What?" By now, his face had turned grim. So very grim. Aye, that's what happened, alright. 2 years we lived here, happy as could be possible. Then, one night I hear her scream from her room. A place no man could get without passing me first. I smashed through her door, I did, and found no trace of her. Her window remained locked. Her closet I searched well, but she'd somehow vanished from the room, with no other good exit. Jordan had searched high and low for his daughter. Several of the locals more than willing to join the hunt. For 3 days he had looked, and for 3 days he had failed. Until one night, as he tried to sleep, the captain had heard his daughter calling to him. A cautious man, despite his desperate hopes, he had taken with him the ceremonial blade awarded to him by his admiral. With it, the innkeeper had gone out into the wilds, following the call of his child. For more than an hour, he had trekked through the woods and the hills, searching and seeking. Finally, near a crooked tree, he had caught sight of his beloved Terena. The girl, her skin so oddly pale, even more so than Kara's, had stood waiting for her father with arms outstretched. She had called out to him again, and Geronin had, of course, responded. Sword in one hand, he had taken his daughter close. Her fangs had nearly ripped out his throat. Captain Geronin had sailed the world, had seen many a marvelous and disturbing thing, had fought pirates and villains in the name of his masters, but no experience in his life had meant more to him than raising his only child. And nothing had ripped at his soul more than running the creature she had become through the heart. "It hangs downstairs," he muttered, finishing. "A fine piece of craftsmanship, and designed to be practical too." Almost as if an afterthought, the captain added, "Plated in silver, or else I'd not be here with you today." What happened to her? Kara knew such tales, but the causes varied. "The damn thing is, I never found out. Finally managed to push it to the back of my mind until you vanished. Feared that it'd come back for you." A daring tear escaped his eye. "I still hear her cries." Both the when she vanishes and the when I... Dronin's unknown horror had not stalked Kara, but the two undead tomb robbers had certainly been waiting with which to draw her to her last back own immediate situation. "Forgive me, Captain, for sounding so uncaring about your great loss. But can you tell me if any ships departing during the time I was lost?" Kara's question caught the grieving man off guard for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Only ship that's sailed off so far has been the Hawksfire. A cursed vessel, if I've ever seen one. Surprised it hasn't sunk yet." "Only a single ship has departed. It had to be the one she wanted. Where was it heading?" "Lutgolane. It always sails to Lutgolane." She knew the name. A prospering kingdom on the western side of the Twin Seas. A place where merchants from all the world bought and sold. Lutgolane. The Vajera and his grinning friend had trekked all the way here from the tomb, moving at a pace only those who felt no exhaustion could maintain. They had specifically came to Gaekul, whose only good purpose served as a point by which to reach other realms. But why? Could only be one reason. They pursued the remaining members of their party, the ones who also carried with them Bartuk's armor. Kara suspected that might be only one man, but she had to keep in mind the possibility of more in mind. So this Hawksfire carried either the survivors or the revenants. If the latter, the pair would have secreted themselves carefully in order to avoid detection. But she would have heard tales of the undead doing whatever they needed while pursuing their victims. Crossing the sea would be difficult, but not impossible. Lutgolane. It might yet be only other brief stop, but at least Kara had a particular destination. "Captain, when is the next ship sailing there?" "Lass, you're barely able to sit up, much less..." Silver eyes fixed unblinking at him. "When?" He rubbed his chin. Not for the time. Maybe a week, maybe more. Much too late. By then, both the revenants and those they pursued would be long gone, the armor with them. Even more important than her dagger remained the fact that the bloody warlord's suit moved about. The enchantments within would certainly call out the ambitious, the evil, even those not necessarily human. I have the funds. Can you recommend a ship I could hire? Dronin eyed her for a moment. This is that important? More than you can imagine. With a sigh, the innkeeper replied, there is a small but sleek vessel, the King's Shield, near the northmost end of the port. She can sail at any time. Just need a day or two to gather the crew and supplies together. Do you think you can convince the owner to hear me out? This caused Dronin to laugh hard. No need to worry about that, my lady. He's a man who used to follow many a cause, so long as it's a good one. Her hopes rose. Already, she felt nearly well enough to travel. The Hawksfire had a few days head start, but with a good ship, Carr might be able to arrive in Luco Lane, but in a short time after. Her unique skills combined with a few careful questions, she enabled her to follow the trail from there. I need to talk to him. I must be able to leave. If you want to leave by tomorrow. Tomorrow morning. Again, she gave him that gaze. Carr regretted pushing, but more than her health and her patience of this other captain were at stake. It must be so. All right. He shook his head. I'll get everything prepared. We'll set sail in the morning. Carr was touched by his sudden offer. It's more than enough that you can convince the King's Shield, Captain, to take this journey. But you need not tear yourself from your beloved inn. This is no longer your concern. I don't like it when my guests are nearly killed. Or worse, lass. Besides, I've been on dry land too long. Be good to feel the sea again. He leaned nearer, giving her a smile. And as for convincing the captain, I don't think you understand me, Captain Tarantulas. I'm the owner of that fine vessel, and by all that's holy, I see that she sails in the morning, or I promise you that there'll truly be hell to pay. As he hurried off to see the arrangements, Kara slumped down, caught by his last words. Hell to pay? Captain Ernest Dronin had no idea just how fateful his oath just might end up being.